The craftsmanship on that piece is truly remarkable.
I quite agree, it's exquisite.
It will certainly fetch a high price. Are you staring at this treasure as if you actually understand it? Your kind should only focus on keeping the gentleman's glasses full. Don't let your filthy eyes diminish the value of a historical masterpiece. My regret is that the 400 billionaires in this room are about to waste their fortune on a pile of gold-plated scrap metal, forged in a counterfeit workshop on the outskirts of Paris in 2014. You are a street rat, boy. A nobody. Your people don't... You will quietly get down on your knees right now, on this floor, in front of every lady and gentleman here, and you will beg for my mercy.
Why would a street rat who cleans up trash ever understand the weight of an empire? Julian Sterling raised his crystal glass, his laugh echoing across the vaulted ceilings of the grand ballroom at the Beacon Hill Manor. Every wealthy donor in a tailored tuxedo burst into a cold, transactional laughter. Aaron Cole, 19 years old, his skin deeply and completely black, stood frozen in his simple white shirt and black catering vest, holding a silver serving tray as a stain of expensive red wine slowly soaked through his collar.
Look at him, ladies and gentlemen.
A diversity hire who thinks a uniform gives him eyes to see. He belongs in the cellar, not staring at a $6.5 million crown like he has the soul to know what it means. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. 400 of Boston's wealthiest elites, individuals who controlled hedge funds, maritime shipping lines, and real estate dynasties, held their drinks at chest height and watched.
No one spoke, no one moved.
The air inside the ballroom smelled of imported lilies, expensive perfume, and the faint, bitter tang of unvarnished cruelty. Julian Sterling stepped closer, his tailored Tom Ford suit catching the amber glow of the baccarat chandeliers that had hung in this room since the 19th century. He sneered, his eyes scanning Aaron's worn trousers and the cheap, scuffed shoes provided by the temporary staffing agency. To Julian, Aaron was an invisible fixture, a shadow meant to carry away dirty plates and refill flutes of Dom Perignon without ever making eye contact. But Aaron did not drop his gaze. He stood perfectly erect, his shoulders back, his posture carrying a quiet, ancestral dignity that money could never purchase. The red wine dripped slowly from his vest, pooling on the hand-polished cherry wood floor. Then the quiet serving boy stepped forward. His jaw was tight, his eyes burning with an ancient, unyielding flame that caused Julian's smug smile to flicker for a fraction of a second.
The crown is an insult to the dynasty it claims to represent, Mr. Sterling.
The third crest on the inner band is missing the royal stamp of the Benin Oba. The alloy contains zinc-plated brass from a foundry outside Paris, manufactured no earlier than 2014. You are asking 400 billionaires to buy a piece of spray-painted scrap metal.
A sharp, collective gasp rippled through the front tables.
The auctioneer's gavel froze mid-air. The members of the board of Sterling's auctions exchanged frantic, panicked glances. Julian's face twisted into a furious, dark crimson as he gripped Aaron by the shoulder, his fingers digging deep into the boy's collar.
Shut your mouth. How dare you speak to me?
Security, get this lying animal out of here before I ensure he spends the next 10 years in a federal cell for defamation and attempted theft. Across the ballroom, seated at table number 4, Madame Vivienne Laurent, the international head of heritage preservation for UNESCO, shot up from her chair. Her eyes locked onto the boy, ignoring the screaming executives and the security guards rushing toward the stage.
She stared at Aaron's hands,
noticing the precise way he had pointed out the microscopic flaws on the artifact. It was as if she was catching the last flicker of truth after a decade of searching through a desert of lies. The guards grabbed Aaron's arms, twisting them behind his back, but he did not make a sound. He did not fight. He simply looked at Julian with a calm, terrifying pity. The crowd watched the young black boy be dragged toward the heavy oak doors, convinced this was the end of a minor, unfortunate disruption. They had no idea that those few spoken words were the first bricks falling from a multi-billion-dollar empire built on deception. They did not know that a secret, hidden for over 20 years, had just been unsealed in front of the world. To understand the fire that burned in Aaron Cole's eyes that evening, one must look past the velvet walls of Beacon Hill Manor and turn back the clock.
Let us rewind.
12 hours before the first glass of champagne was poured, a gray, biting winter fog hung low over the brick tenements of Roxbury, a working-class neighborhood miles away from the wealth of downtown Boston. Aaron's morning began at exactly 4:30 a.m., long before the sun had even cleared the horizon. The small radiator in his drafty attic apartment rattled and hissed, offering little warmth against the freezing Massachusetts air. Aaron sat on the edge of his narrow twin bed, his muscular frame wrapped in a faded, hooded sweatshirt. He did not mind the cold. He had spent his entire life adapting to environments that were never designed to welcome him. He rose quietly, careful not to wake his grandmother, who slept in the small room downstairs. Her health had been failing, and the rising costs of her medication required every extra dollar Aaron could bring home.
He walked over to a worn wooden table in the corner of his room.
Sitting upon the table was a small, velvet-lined mahogany box. It was the only item of value Aaron owned, a sacred relic passed down through 4 generations of his family. Inside the box lay a collection of antique brass calipers, a magnifying glass wrapped in weathered leather, and a small hand-notated journal written in a dialect of southwestern Nigeria. This journal belonged to his great-grandfather, a master artisan and chief metalsmith who had served the royal lineage of Benin. For over a century, his family had possessed a rare ancestral gift, the ability to read the heartbeat of metal, to identify the exact origin, age, and purity of an artifact simply by feeling the density of the grain and the microscopic patterns of the forge. Aaron's father, Marcus Cole,
Had carried that same gift.
Marcus had been a brilliant, self-taught conservator who operated a small, humble restoration shop in the heart of Boston. He was a man who worked not for fame, but for the preservation of history. But 7 years earlier, Marcus's trusting nature became his downfall. Pierce Sterling, who was then a rising, ambitious art dealer looking to establish his own auction house, had walked into Marcus's shop. Pierce had discovered a collection of ancient West African bronzes that Marcus had spent decades legally recovering and restoring for local historical societies. Recognizing their immense, untapped market of value, Pierce used a series of predatory contracts, falsified legal documents, and the weight of his family's high-priced attorneys to completely strip Marcus of his entire collection. Pierce claimed the artifacts were stolen goods, using his influence within the elite art community to blackball Marcus, ruining the honest man's reputation overnight. Broken-hearted, financially ruined, and unable to fight the system, Marcus's health deteriorated rapidly, and he passed away within a year, leaving his young son with nothing but a box of tools and a deep, burning memory of the man who had stolen his family's legacy. Aaron picked up the leather-wrapped magnifying glass, tracing his fingers over the worn grip. He closed his eyes, remembering his father's voice from his childhood. "A true artisan doesn't look at the surface, Aaron.
The metal will always tell you its true story.
Greed makes men sloppy, and one day their own lies will expose them." Aaron placed the tools back into the mahogany box and closed the lid with a soft click. He had not taken a job with the elite catering company at Beacon Hill Manor just to earn a temporary wage. He had done it because he knew that tonight, Sterling's Auctions was hosting its grandest charity event, and the centerpiece of the entire night was an artifact. Pierce Sterling claimed to have discovered in a private European collection the lost Benin crown.
Aaron knew the truth.
He knew the original crown had been documented by his grandfather, and he knew that Pierce had never found it. By 6:30 a.m., Aaron was already standing in the freezing cold outside the back entrance of the grand ballroom at Beacon Hill Manor. The staffing supervisor, a sharp-tongued man named Miller, looked at Aaron's deep black skin and handed him a heavy tray of silver polish. The staff dining area is down the hall to the left, through the service kitchen, Miller said, not looking up from his clipboard. Don't wander into the main gallery before the guests arrive. The director is very particular about the presentation, and he doesn't like unnecessary movement.
Keep your head down, do your job, and don't make eye contact with the donors.
Aaron nodded once, his expression calm and unreadable. He had spent his entire life learning how to navigate spaces where he was treated as a ghost, a shadow moving between the walls of privilege. He spent the next 5 hours polishing heavy silver platters until his arms ached, his reflection staring back at him from the mirrored surfaces.
He cleaned the crystal flutes
that would hold $1,000 vintages, and he arranged the white linen napkins with absolute precision. As the afternoon turned to evening, the transformation of the ballroom began. The catering staff moved with frantic energy, setting up the ice sculptures, arranging the rare orchids, and testing the lighting systems. At 3:30 p.m., a massive, armored security van arrived at the front entrance. 4 armed guards escorted a heavy, climate-controlled steel case up the marble steps and into the center of the exhibition hall. From the shadows of the service balcony, Aaron watched as Pierce Sterling himself stepped forward to unlock the case. Pierce wore a perfectly tailored, navy blue suit, his silver hair immaculate, his movements calculated and theatrical. With white silk gloves, Pierce lifted the golden crown from the velvet padding and placed it beneath a reinforced glass display case equipped with laser security sensors. To the untrained eye of the wealthy board members standing around the stage, the artifact was breathtaking. It gleamed with a brilliant, ancient radiance, its intricate geometric patterns reflecting the light of the chandeliers. The board members clapped softly, congratulating Pierce on bringing such a rare masterpiece to the American market. But from his distant vantage point, Aaron's eyes narrowed. He didn't need a magnifying glass. He didn't need to stand inches away. He could see the way the light fractured against the edges of the metal.
The reflection was too sharp, the texture too uniform.
Ancient gold forged in the furnaces of the African continent possessed a deeper, softer warmth, a unique weight that could never be replicated by modern chemical acceleration techniques. Pierce Sterling was holding a ghost, a magnificent deception designed to deceive the wealthiest collectors in the country and cement his status at the absolute top of the art world. Aaron quietly turned away from the balcony and walked back down to the staff locker room to prepare for the evening. He put on the crisp white shirt, the stiff black vest, and the black bow tie. As he fastened the buttons, his hands were steady, his pulse slow and measured. He knew the risks. He knew that an anonymous 19-year-old black boy from Roxbury standing up against a multimillionaire in a room full of judges, politicians, and billionaires was an act of social suicide. The system was built to crush people like him to protect people like Pierce. But as Aaron straightened his collar and picked up his heavy silver serving tray, he felt the memory of his father's hand on his shoulder. He wasn't afraid of their wealth, and he wasn't afraid of their titles. He knew that the truth possessed a weight of its own, and once it was set in motion, not even the thickest walls of Beacon Hill Manor could stop it from crushing the empire built upon its back. The air inside the grand ballroom of Beacon Hill Manor froze into a terrifying stillness. Aaron Cole stood perfectly calm, flanked by 2 burly security guards whose heavy hands gripped his elbows. Julian Sterling stood on the elevated stage, his chest rising and falling with rapid, furious breaths. The accusation hung in the air like a physical weight, vibrating against the crystal glass of the 3 massive baccarat chandeliers. Julian's eyes narrowed into slits as he looked down at the 19-year-old serving boy. To Julian, this was not just a disruption. It was an existential threat to his entire career, his reputation, and the multi-million-dollar transaction he had spent months orchestrating. He turned to the crowd, his voice booming with a practiced theatrical authority designed to regain control of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, do not let this pathetic display alarm you," Julian said, his laughter sounding hollow and forced as it bounced off the polished cherry wood walls. "What we are witnessing here is a classic, desperate act of sabotage. This boy is a temporary catering worker, a diversity hire brought in from the streets of Roxbury to wash dishes and clear garbage. He has no education, no background in fine arts, and certainly no authority to speak on the integrity of an imperial artifact. He is an illiterate fraud attempting to make a name for himself by slandering the name of Sterling's Auctions." From the back of the room, Headmaster Vance Gregory of the elite prep school that partnered with the catering company stood up, his face pale, adjusting his silk bow tie. He cleared his throat loudly, eager to distance himself from the controversy. "Mr. Sterling, on behalf of the institution, I offer our deepest apologies. This boy's employment will be terminated immediately. We will launch a full internal investigation into how a criminal element was allowed to infiltrate this exclusive event." Julian waved his hand dismissively, his face twisting into a self-righteous sneer. "Terminating his employment is not enough, Headmaster. This is a matter of federal fraud, defamation, and malicious intent to disrupt a certified international charity auction.
Look at him.
He has deliberately ruined an expensive uniform, insulted the integrity of every prestigious donor in this room, and attempted to devalue a historical masterpiece." Julian stepped down from the stage, his polished leather shoes clicking sharply against the floor until he stood mere inches away from Aaron. The contrast was stark. Julian in his $3,000 custom tuxedo, smelling of expensive cologne, and Aaron in his wine-stained vest, his dark skin glistening under the harsh gallery lights. Julian leaned in close, his voice dropping to a vicious, venomous whisper that carried to the first 3 tables.
"You are a street rat, boy.
A nobody.
Your people don't create history. You clean up after it.
You think, because you read a book or looked at a website, you can stand in my ballroom and challenge my authority. You are nothing but a welfare leech, trying to steal a moment of attention from your betters. You will quietly get down on your knees right now, on this floor, in front of every lady and gentleman here, and you will beg for my mercy. If you do not, I will personally ensure the Boston Police Department locks you away in a concrete cell before midnight, and you will never see the light of day again." The crowd remained silent, watching the interaction with a detached, cold curiosity. Several wealthy women at table 2 turned their heads away, hiding their smiles behind silk napkins. A prominent hedge fund manager at table 5 casually took a sip of his vintage champagne, completely unbothered by the public destruction of a young black boy's dignity. The systemic weight of the room was entirely aligned against Aaron, a wall of wealth and privilege designed to crush anyone who dared to question its foundation.
But Aaron did not bend.
He did not drop to his knees, and his breathing did not accelerate. He looked into Julian's furious eyes with a terrifying, unshakable calm. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, but it possessed a deep, resonant clarity that seemed to cut right through the suffocating atmosphere of the ballroom.
"I will not quietly kneel to a thief, Mr. Sterling," Aaron said, each word measured and steady. "My knees bend only for the truth, and the truth is something your money cannot buy. You can call the police. You can call the federal government.
You can lock my body in a cell, but you cannot lock away the fact that the object under that glass case is a lie. You know it, and I know it. Every second that Crown sits beneath those lights, your empire loses another brick. I do not need your mercy, because the system you built to protect yourself is about to tear you apart." Julian's face went from crimson to an ash gray, as a cold sweat broke out along his hairline. He grabbed the arm of the head security guard, his fingers shaking with a mixture of rage and sudden, unexplainable panic.
What are you waiting for?
Drag him out of here. Call the police department immediately. Have them bring handcuffs. I want this boy removed from my sight now. The two guards tightened their grip on Aaron's arms, pulling him backward toward the heavy, brass-accented oak doors at the rear of the hall. Aaron's scuffed shoes dragged slightly against the cherry wood floor, leaving a faint mark alongside the pooled red wine. Yet, even as he was being forced out, his head remained high, his gaze locked onto Julian with an expression of profound pity. The guests began to murmur, the tension in the room reaching a boiling point. The orchestra remained frozen, their violins held at their sides, the conductor refusing to lift his baton until the disruption was resolved. Julian returned to the stage, straightening his cuffs, attempting to plaster his confident, arrogant smile back onto his face. He picked up his microphone, his hand trembling slightly as he dressed the room. My apologies once again. For that unfortunate interlude, Julian announced, his voice echoing artificially through the speakers. As I was saying before we were so rudely interrupted by the help, the bidding for this magnificent piece of history will open at $4 million.
Do I hear 4 million?
But before a single paddle could be raised, before any billionaire in the room could offer a bid, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom did not just open. They were thrown wide with a resounding crash that caused every guest to turn around in their seats. A cold winter wind rushed into the heated hall, carrying with it the sudden unmistakable authority of an incoming storm. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom rattled against the stone walls as they swung open. Standing in the threshold, framed by the cold Boston winter fog, was a figure that caused the entire room of billionaires to fall into an immediate, breathless silence. Madame Vivienne Laurent, the international head of heritage preservation for UNESCO, stepped forward. She did not look at the glittering chandeliers or the wealthy donors. Her eyes, sharp and unforgiving, were locked entirely on Aaron Cole. Flanking her were 4 federal agents wearing dark suits, their gold badges catching the light, their expressions grim and unyielding. Julian Sterling felt a sudden icy knot tighten in his stomach, but he quickly forced a sycophantic smile onto his face, rushing down the steps of the stage with his arms extended. Madame Laurent, what an unexpected honor. We were just beginning the bidding on the Benin masterpiece. If you had informed me of your arrival, I would have prepared a seat at the head table for you. Madame Laurent did not stop walking. She moved past Julian as if he were made of glass, her heels clicking sharply against the cherry wood floor. She walked straight toward the 2 security guards, who were still holding Aaron's arms.
Release him, she said.
Her voice was quiet, but it carried an absolute, unquestioned authority that caused the guards to drop their hands instantly. She turned to Aaron, her expression softening into a look of profound respect. She bowed her head slightly, a gesture of reverence that no one in that room had ever seen her give to a corporate executive or a politician. Mr. Cole, she said, her voice clear enough to echo off the high ceilings. On behalf of the international community, I apologize for the ignorance you have been subjected to tonight. Your family's legacy does not belong in the hands of thieves. Julian's face drained of color, his hands trembling as he stepped between Madame Laurent and Aaron. Madame Laurent, I must protest. This boy is a common catering worker, a trespasser who has just slandered the integrity of our auction house.
He knows nothing of art. He is a fraud.
Madame Laurent turned slowly, her eyes freezing Julian in his tracks.
A fraud, Mr. Sterling.
She reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, official document bearing the blue embossed seal of the United Nations and the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Art Crime Team. This young man is Aaron Cole. He is the direct great-grandson of Chief Oba Cole, the master artisan of the Benin Royal Court. His family has been the certified custodians of West African metallurgical history for over a century. He possesses more artistic knowledge in his small finger than your entire board of directors has accumulated in a lifetime. A shockwave of murmurs ripped through the ballroom. Headmaster Vance Gregory sank back into his chair, his face turning an ash gray. The hedge fund managers and senators, who had been laughing moments before, suddenly set their glasses down, their eyes darting between Julian and the federal agents. Madame Laurent walked up to the glass display case, pointing directly at the gleaming Vung Min. 6 months ago, Mr. Cole submitted a highly confidential, encrypted forensic report to our department, she announced to the room. He provided the exact chemical and structural signature of the authentic crown, which has been safely recovered and secured in a secure museum archive in West Africa since 2024. He also flagged a massive shipment of counterfeit brass alloy imported from a fraudulent foundry in the suburbs of Paris, an order placed directly by a shell company owned by Sterling's Auctions. Julian stumbled backward, his foot catching on the edge of the stage. That's a lie. It's an administrative error. I am a certified appraiser. I have degrees from the finest institutions in this country. You cannot take the word of a servant over mine. Aaron stepped forward, his voice calm, steady, and entirely devoid of anger. It was the voice of a judge delivering a final verdict. You have the degrees, Mr. Sterling, but you never had the truth. You thought that by putting me in a uniform and giving me a silver tray, you could make me invisible. You thought that, because my skin is black, I couldn't read the history that my own ancestors forged with their blood. Aaron walked up to the glass case, and the federal agents immediately stepped aside to give him room. He didn't use tools. He simply pointed his long, elegant finger at the third intricate crest on the inner band of the gold structure. Look at the axial rotation of the engraving, Mr. Sterling. Modern laser replication tools cut at a perfect 90-degree angle. True hand-hammered gold from the 16th century carries an organic 8-degree variance. My father, Marcus Cole, tried to show you that variance 7 years ago when you came into his shop and used your high-priced lawyers to steal his collection and destroy his life. The room gasped. A retired federal judge at table 3 stood up, his face grim. Marcus Cole? The brilliant conservator from Roxbury who died of a broken heart. Yes, Aaron said, looking directly into Julian's panicking eyes. You broke my father's heart, and you built this entire auction house on the ruins of his reputation. But you forgot one thing, Mr. Sterling. Gold remembers, and so do I. Madame Laurent turned to the federal agents, her face stern. Arrest him, she said. The lead FBI agent stepped forward, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. Julian Sterling, you are under arrest for international wire fraud, the trafficking of counterfeit cultural property, and grand larceny, the agent declared, his voice echoing through the silent hall. Julian's arrogant posture completely collapsed. He did not cry or beg for mercy. Instead, he frantically looked around the room, his eyes searching the faces of the 400 billionaires he had dined with for years. He looked at the senators, the CEOs, the old money dynasties of Boston. "Help me!" he choked out, his voice cracked and desperate. "Someone call my attorney. You all know me. We've done business for a decade." But no one moved, no one spoke. The very same elites who had shared a transactional laugh with Julian minutes ago now turned their faces away, completely erasing him from their social ledger. They watched in absolute silence as the cuffs clicked tightly around Julian's wrists. The grand director of Sterling's Auctions, the man who believed he owned the culture and the history of a continent, was dragged out of his own ballroom, his polished leather shoes scraping pathetically against the cherry wood floor. Aaron stood in the center of the hall, the wine stain still on his chest, but he looked like the only king in the room. Madame Laurent walked to his side, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It is over, Aaron," she whispered. Your father's name is clean. 6 months after the winter fog had rolled through the shattered empire of Sterling's auctions, the grand ballroom of Beacon Hill Manor stood empty, its cherry wood floors polished to a mirror-like shine that no longer reflected the shadow of a thief. Aaron Cole's recovery of his family's honor did not conclude on the night the handcuffs clicked around Julian Sterling's wrists. Justice, much like the restoration of an ancient artifact, was a process that had to be forged one painstaking layer at a time. The video of a 19-year-old black wine server standing in front of 400 billionaires, exposing a multi-million-dollar cultural fraud with nothing but his bare hands and inherited intellect, reached 22 million views in less than 48 hours.
The public awakening was absolute.
By the following spring, Julian Sterling sat in a stark, unvarnished federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania, serving a 12-year sentence for grand larceny and the trafficking of fraudulent cultural property. In his mandatory deposition, stripped of his custom Tom Ford suits and his elite titles, Julian finally looked at a photograph of Marcus Cole and wept, not just out of fear for his own survival, but out of the crushing, belated realization that he had destroyed an innocent man's life only to be brought down by the very bloodline he tried to erase. But Aaron did not spend his time looking back at the ruins of his enemy. Today, under the warm June sun, Aaron stood on the steps of the newly established Cole Institute of Cultural Heritage in downtown Boston. The massive limestone building, funded entirely by a $45 million endowment from the International Heritage Fund and private restitution, was dedicated to the forensic preservation of indigenous art. Hanging directly above the grand marble entrance was the hand-painted wooden sign from his father's old shop in Roxbury, restored to its original brilliance. Inside the main gallery, the authentic Benin crown sat beneath a secure, open-air pavilion returned to the public trust, where its true history could be taught to children of every color and background. Aaron, now wearing a sharp, tailored gray suit that fit him with the natural elegance of a true director, looked at his reflection in the glass. Around his neck, resting just above his collar, was the silver locket containing his great-grandfather's image. Dignity isn't something anyone can take from you,
Unless you let them.
His father's name was clean, his family's legacy was secured, and as Aaron looked out the window at a group of young, wide-eyed students from Roxbury entering the gallery with notebooks in their hands, he knew that the fire his father had lit in his soul would never be extinguished. This is not, in the end, a story about an auction or a golden crown. It is a story about who we choose to see and who we choose to look right through. It is a story about the quiet boy pouring wine at the edge of a room full of millionaires, the legacy that privilege tried to bury, and the 400 witnesses who almost let cruelty win because cruelty was wearing a tuxedo. Every grand ballroom has an Aaron. Every elite institution has a Julian. And every quiet servant whose hands have been trained by a lineage of love will, sooner or later, be asked to stand up in a room they were never invited to and decide in 3 seconds whether their gift is for themselves or for the truth that demands to be told. If this story moved you, if you have ever been the Aaron, or one of the 400 people who stayed in their seats and wished that they had stood up, share this video with someone who needs to see it. Send it to the friend who has been told their background defines their limit. Send it to the parent raising a child the world is already trying to write off. And subscribe to this channel, because we tell stories like this every week, and we tell them for people exactly like you. Let me ask you 3 philosophical questions to carry with you tonight. 1. If you were sitting at table number 4 that evening, would you have joined in the corporate laughter, or would you have been the one to stand up beside the serving boy? 2. How many brilliant minds have we dismissed in our own lives, simply because we couldn't see past the uniform they were wearing? 3. When your room goes quiet and the system demands that you stay seated, will you find the courage to stand?
Type dignity for Aaron
In the comments below, if you believe that a quiet boy with inherited truth is worth more than a millionaire with a stolen title.
There is an Easter egg hidden at exactly minute 11 and 15 seconds of this video.
A small movement of Julian's hand that predicted his downfall long before the FBI arrived.
Go back, find it, and let us know in the comments below.